Hello, this is Dr. Saldivar. Today we'll be looking at Chapter 3 in the Feldman text, Essentials of Understanding Psychology. Chapter 3 looks at the topics of sensation and perception. Psychophysics is the study of the relationship between physical stimuli and psychological experiences. That's a mouthful, so let's unpack it here. So, psychophysics is basically the study of the connection or the interface between a human being or any other living creature and the world around them. We, as humans, live in the world, but of course, we're not just floating around in space, right? Stuff is happening around us, and we have to act on or react to that stuff that happens in the world. This stuff that happens in the world, when it produces a response in a sense organ, like our eyes, ears, tongue, fingers in terms of sense of touch, for example. This is called a stimulus, singular, or stimuli, plural. So something happens in the environment that produces a stimulus. We sense it with one of our sensory organs as a human, and then we react in some way. I walk out of the door of my home. Inside, I may have been watching TV or reading or whatever, so the lighting is very low. I walk outside to the front porch, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning, not a cloud in the sky, the sun is shining, so it's very bright. So, among other things I may do is squint my eyes because I don't want to hurt my eyes because of how bright the sunlight is. The stimulus here is the bright sunlight or the bright conditions, and my response, based on the information coming into my eyeballs in this example, is for me to squint my eyes to try and protect them from this going from a suddenly dimmer or darker environment to a suddenly much more bright environment. Sensation is a term we use to describe the activation of sense organs by stimuli. So again, use the same example. If I walk out of a dark room, go outside, it's very sunny. The sensation of brightness, the sensation of wow, it's really bright out here. That is describing the activation, the reaction of my eyeballs to the stimulus of the bright sunlight. Now, here's the real distinction that's important for this chapter. Sensation is the activation of sense organs. Sensation is what we're feeling, seeing, tasting, touching. Perception is the process by which that sensory information is taken by our brain and manipulated, translated in some way. And often that manipulation, that translation, that part of the process is more complex and really depends on a lot of factors that can be individual to us. We'll see more examples of this, and I'll unpack this for us as we go forward. Now, as you know from the reading, if you haven't done it yet, but even just from your own lifetime of being human, you'll be aware that humans have 5 basic senses, right? Smell, touch, taste, vision, and hearing. We touch with our hands and fingers, or if you prefer, with our skin. That's kind of our main sensory organ for touching. We taste things with our tongue, with our mouth. We see things or have vision with our eyes, hear with our ears, and smell with our nose. Those are the sense organs, but all the data collected, all the information that's coming into those sense organs eventually ends up in different parts of the brain that are specialized for processing information about smell, taste, touch, etc. So this perception process is the process of receiving information, sensing information, visual information, hearing, taste information, whatever. And then the brain interprets, makes sense of those sensations, and that allows us to perceive something about the world around us. A running joke I have with a lot of my family members, friends, sometimes even my students. I grew up in South Texas, in Brownsville, so very warm climate. It can get chilly every now and then, but that's very rare. And truly cold temperatures, as in below freezing, are very, very uncommon. When I was growing up, and even in more recent times, I often saw people when the temperatures were not particularly cold by the standards of someone in Colorado or Illinois or New York. Let's say temperatures in the low 60s. It's common to see people in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, dressed like this young woman here. And again, my point is not to criticize or mock anyone. I'm just pointing out. If you walk around the Rio Grande Valley when it's 60 degrees, you'll see a lot of people wearing hooded coats, parkas, wearing gloves, scarves. When I was a graduate student at the University of Colorado in the early 2000s, in the area where the university was, Boulder, um, in the fall, winter time, it's very common to have highs in the upper 50s, low 60s, and then overnight to be close to freezing. There may or may not be snow on the ground, but it could still be much cooler, much colder than it would have been in South Texas. And so I often saw people, neighbors, even people around campus, who, if they were going out for short distances, maybe leaving their building, if they were another grad student or a faculty member, the school cafeteria, the campus student center was just about 30 feet down the sidewalk from the building where I had my little cubicle as a PhD student. So sometimes some of my fellow PhD students and I, or a faculty member that we might pass in the hall, we decided to go get coffee or something from the student center 30 feet down the sidewalk. Unless it was actively snowing or very windy or some other conditions, if it was just cold, even if there was snow on the ground, if the snow was just sitting there, it had already fallen and there wasn't any blizzard condition going on, a lot of times we may just, if we had, a light sweatshirt, sweater, cardigan, long sleeve shirt, we might just walk down the sidewalk without our heavy coat on because we're only going a few feet, walk into the student center, get our coffee, and then come back. The point is, people sensing cold in the RGV, where there's a cold front here in the valley, people sensing cold in the Boulder area during the fall or the winter time there when it was colder, both of their sensation processes are similar. We feel cold typically through our skin. There are neurons in our skin that are particularly sensitive to heat and cold, and those let our brain know, wow, it's warm, wow, it's cold, wow, it's cool, whatever the temperature is. That's sensation. But the perception of, let's say, 60 degrees, 50 degrees, 40 degrees, the perception of, is 60 degrees just kind of cool or is it really cold? Is 50 degrees just kind of cool or really cold? Is 40 degrees just kind of cool, really cold? Or something else? That perception is very individualized. That perception comes from this translation, this making sense of sensory information process that's happening in our brains. So again, just to review, sensation is the feeling, the sensing of stuff from around us, things we see, hear, touch, smell, taste. But our brains will have to go through a perception process where we as individuals translate, what does that mean for me? You may sense 60-degree weather, and your perception of it is that that's really cold, and you need to wear a heavy coat and gloves and a scarf. I may sense that 60 degrees is just kind of chilly. And I may perceive that because it's just chilly, I'm content to just, as long as I have a long sleeve shirt on, maybe a t-shirt underneath, I'll be fine. I don't need a heavy coat or with a hood or gloves or a scarf. Perception's not right or wrong. It's just different. It's just individual. This goes to another important area related to this idea of sensing versus perceiving things. Millions of years of evolution have built into us humans an instinctual need to see patterns or see order in the world around us. Evolution has hardwired the human brain this trait of wanting order, wanting to see patterns into us, because it helps us survive in a dangerous world. If you see a pattern in something, especially a pattern that potentially is a danger, and you react to that perceived danger, if you think there's danger there, and I'll give you an example here in a moment. If you think you're seeing danger, if you perceive you're seeing danger, and it actually isn't dangerous, whatever the thing is, situation. Okay, you may have spent some calories running away or hiding or whatever, but you're safe. But if you perceive danger and it is there, and it's the act of reacting to that perception, oh, I see danger, let me run away, let me hide, let me do something to keep myself safe, you've kept yourself safe. And evolution wants you to survive so that your species will survive. Let me make this more real. Imagine you were one of our human ancestors. Your humans evolved in what is now East Africa, what's called the Great Rift Valley. I've never been there, but I've seen a lot of video footage, photos. The environment reminds me very much of Southern California, or maybe areas around the Mediterranean, like central southern Italy. This is probably why most humans tend to think that Southern California, or areas around Italy and Greece are desirable climates, because that's the kind of climate that our human ancestors evolved into back in Africa. So you're living in East Africa, 80,000 years ago, and you leave your little village, your little tribe, to walk down to the river to get a drink of water. You pass by a tree, and here's a photo of the tree here on the screen. You pass by a tree you've passed many times before in your life, so you're used to the tree. It's part of the background. But that day, something is a little off. So instead of just taking it for granted, instead of just treating that tree as part of the background, you look more closely, because there's something not quite right. And then you realize a leopard, which is a very common predator in that part of Africa, there's a predator sitting up in the tree. It's taking advantage of its coloration, its spots, to try and blend in with the tree. And it's hoping if it stands very still, it can do what leopards do. Leopards are what are called ambush predators. They don't chase stuff down like wolves. They prefer to sit around and wait for their prey to come to them. So the leopard is up in a tree waiting for a human or some other thing it can feed on to come along, and hope that doesn't get noticed, because its coloration helps it blend in with the tree. And then as soon as the human or whatever other prey comes along is within distance, the leopard will jump out of the tree and attack. Again, evolution has wired into us this need, this desire to see patterns, to find order in the world around us. Because, as in this example, if you're walking down from the village, your village, to the river to get a drink of water, you pass a tree, there's a leopard in it. Understanding this pattern, seeing what was going on, seeing that the leopard doesn't quite exactly 100% match the pattern of the tree, right? There are some differences. It's pretty close, but there are some differences. Our ability to recognize patterns, and thus recognize when patterns don't match, in this example, would have saved us from getting eaten. Being able to recognize patterns is good. It has an evolutionary benefit. That's why that trait, in fact, that desire, that need to find patterns, to make sense of the world around us, to find explanations for things, is part of being human. The downside, or the other side of the coin, is that we want to see patterns so badly that it's possible for us as humans to perceive patterns when they really aren't there. Or maybe we could say to misperceive a pattern. We call this optical illusions, and there are a lot of examples we've all seen. Again, perceiving these optical illusions it doesn't mean we're a bad person, something wrong with us. We're just human. But if we're not aware that we can fall into this trap of being taken in by optical illusions, then that can really skew our perception. Here's an example. Most of us have seen images like this over the years, where this is just a simple, well, not simple, but it's just a two-dimensional image, but it kind of looks 3D, right? It looks like it has depth. It looks like we could reach out and kind of curl our hand or arm around that central column, as if there's a tunnel or an open space around that column. That's because the way that these circles and ovals and the different color patterns are laid out, our brain thinks we're seeing a three-dimensional space when really it's just a two-dimensional image. That's one example of an optical illusion. Another example, here this photo was taken at a train station in Europe. The individual was standing up on a height and then looking down at the train tracks. Those red lines are all the same length from the bottom to the top. Every red line there is the same length. Every red line is parallel to every other red line. But most of us will perceive the red lines towards the top to be longer or wider than the red lines towards the bottom. Because when they're overlaid with these train tracks, and because of our perception, because of how our human brain interprets vision, especially things like two parallel train tracks going off into the distance, our brain perceives that those parallel train tracks will eventually connect off in the distance. So it's more of a triangle than a true parallel line. That's not what's happening in reality. That's just what our brains are perceiving. And we can point this out by overlaying those red parallel lines. Again, the fact that our brains are fooled into thinking that some lines are longer than others, even though they're really not, doesn't mean that we're bad people. There's something wrong with us. That's just the way our brains work. But we need to be aware that that's how our brains work, because that might help save us from trouble, from problems, because we're seeing patterns that not really there. Another common optical illusion, there's a famous building in Pisa, Italy, called the Leaning Tower of Pisa. You can see this structure, this tower, is several stories tall. It was built in an area that had a lot of soft soil, and then over the centuries, it started to lean more and more because the building itself is pretty sturdy, but the foundation it's built on has sunk partially into the ground, and so it tilts over. So the building is fairly tall, especially for pre-modern times. What people like to do is walk away a certain distance. There's a broad open field around the area where this building's located, if you've never been there. And people will find a certain area where, from the perspective of someone taking a photo, it looks like you as the tourist, as a visitor, are about the same height or even taller than the building. So here you see this young woman, she's pictured such a way that it looks like she's hugging this leaning building. Of course she's not. The building is multiple times taller than she is. It's just an optical illusion. It's the perception that's coming, in this case, not even from our eyeballs. It's coming via a photograph. But nonetheless, our brain is putting together the bits of information, the sensory information coming in such a way that we perceive, oh, this giant woman is hugging this tall building. Final example, then we'll conclude. This is another kind of a very common optical illusion. Depending on how you see the image, and most of us, if we stare at this long enough, will see both pieces. One perception you may have of this image on the top right of the screen is of a male figure with kind of longer hair parted sort of in the middle, and then a mustache and a nose and an eyeball, partially in shadow. But if you kind of shift your perception, you may see instead a young woman facing in the opposite direction with her hand stretched out, and then she's kind of illuminated from the front, and there's maybe a curtain or some kind of fabric that's draped across the edge of the room. One image, one picture, this was originally a painting, I believe, but depending on our perception, we can see at first one thing, then another. With a lot of effort, you may be able to kind of see both at the same time, but that's a little tougher and that takes more effort. But again, these are all examples of the fact that our brains are so desperate to try and find patterns to make order out of the world around us that we even can see stuff that isn't really there. All right, let's review the major ideas from this chapter. Stuff in the world around us, stimuli, produce a response in one or more sense organs, and we call this process, this function to be sensation. Perception is a process by which these stimuli go through a process or procedure of translation, of making sense of in our brain, so that we're able to understand or try to understand or think we understand what our senses are telling us. Am I seeing danger? Am I feeling cold weather? If so, what action should I take in response to this? Evolution has predisposed us as humans to favor patterns, to want to find patterns, order in the world around us. And so our brains will seek out patterns, even if they're not really there. That concludes this presentation. I hope you found it helpful as you prepare to read Chapter 3 of Feldman. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.